Makalu is an imposing peak that looms mightily above the other Himalayan granite that surrounds it. Makalu is one of the tallest mountains on the planet, standing at a height of 8,481 meters at its summit, which makes it the fifth highest mountain in the entire world, and notably, the last of the 14 8,000 meter peaks in the world that I've not covered on the channel thus far. Makalu has earned a fearsome reputation within the mountaineering community throughout the years, as it has remained one of the least popular of the 8,000 meter peaks for mountaineers to summit due to its difficulty, much like Kanchenjunga. Furthermore, Makalu is located in a remote region that is difficult to reach along the Chinese-Nepalese border, which makes the peak unappealing to all but the most dedicated mountaineers. Considering these factors, it should come as no surprise then that Makalu was one of the last of the 14 8,000 meter peaks to be successfully summited, as it was only first climbed on at all in 1954 by an American expedition team, and was first summited the following year in 1955 by a French expedition team led by Lionel Terray and Jean Cousy, where they managed to scale the north face of the peak to successfully reach the summit. In the years following this first ascent, Makalu would attract mostly a few hardcore and dedicated high-level mountaineers with previous 8,000er experience to its slopes in pursuit of reaching its summit for themselves. During the Spring Himalayan climbing season of 2019, several teams of highly experienced mountaineers mounted their expedition teams, with aspirations of summiting Makalu. The largest expedition team pushing for the summit was an 18-man Indian Army expedition team, who had begun their trek to base camp on April 2nd, and by early May, they were poised to make a push for the summit. The Indian Army expedition team would be making their push for the summit during the same favorable weather window that several smaller private expedition teams also sought to utilize, which, after several weeks of foul weather with intermittent days or mere hours of sunshine, a multiple-day window of fair weather finally appeared on the horizon, and summit hopefuls across all parties were eager to finally make an attempt at reaching the top. One of these summit hopefuls that season was a 52-year-old Indian man named Dipankar Ghosh, who was a seasoned mountaineer with a number of successful 8,000er ascents, including Kanchenjunga, Manaslu, Annapurna, Everest, Dhaulagiri, Lhotse, and a previous successful summit of Makalu that he completed in the year 2013. For this ascent of Makalu, he would charter his expedition from a company named Seven Summits Treks. A strong climber, Ghosh capitalized on the favorable weather window and had reached high camp on the evening of May 15th, as he was poised to make a push for the summit the following day on May 16th. Simultaneously, the 18-man Indian Army expedition team had also made use of the favorable weather window as well, and had reached their high camp the same evening, May 15th, with a planned push for the summit the following day on May 16th. On May 16th, 2019, Summit Day, Dipankar Ghosh and his assigned Sherpa for his summit push set off from their high camp, Camp 4, which was reportedly located within the death zone. The death zone is reached at an altitude above 8,000 meters, where oxygen in the air becomes too sparse to sustain human life for more than a few days at best, even when at complete rest. The weather conditions for the day were not ideal, as conditions were described as overcast with a brisk wind. However, the forecast for the weather for the upcoming days predicted storms, and thus, Ghosh and his Sherpa, after consulting with their team at base camp, decided to make an attempt at the summit. The last stretch from their high camp to the summit was a laborious climb, and the men made their way up the mountain at a glacial pace, gaining a few dozen meters in vertical progression an hour throughout the morning hours. By the early afternoon, Ghosh's accompanying Sherpa began to fall ill with symptoms of altitude sickness just shy of the summit by about 100 meters, and thus he refused to accompany Ghosh any further up the mountain. However, at around this time, Ghosh and his Sherpa had crossed paths with one of the Indian Army expedition team members, a man named Narayan Singh, who was similarly suffering from symptoms of severe altitude sickness, and so Ghosh instructed his Sherpa to accompany Singh back to Camp 4 in order for both of them to get some time to recuperate. Subsequently, however, Ghosh decided to continue pushing for the summit alone, following in the trail of the Indian Army summit team that was reveling in their triumph at the summit just a few meters above him. Ghosh continued to make steady progress towards the summit throughout the early afternoon, as the weather began to swirl more violently with every passing minute. Ghosh reached the summit at just before 4 p.m. that afternoon, and after reveling in his own triumph for a few short minutes, he began his descent towards Camp 4. However, as Ghosh descended, the weather had escalated to whiteout conditions with fierce, lashing winds, and Ghosh would unfortunately never make it back to Camp 4 that evening, as he would go missing during this descent. Furthermore, the member of the Indian Army expedition team suffering with symptoms of severe altitude sickness that had descended to Camp 4 accompanied by Ghosh's assigned Sherpa, Narayan Singh, tragically died as a result of his altitude sickness overnight while he was resting in a tent at Camp 4, with his lifeless body discovered by his Indian Army companions the next morning, May 17th. That very same morning, a rescue team was dispatched to search for Ghosh. However, due to the frigid conditions on the mountain and the relative lack of shelter along the summit ridge where he went missing, it was assumed, even by his team members, that he surely must have perished during the night. The search and rescue team canvassed the area below the summit where he was last seen, instructing his Sherpa to accompany Singh. However, they were unable to locate his body due to poor visibility due to the foul weather conditions on the mountain. 8 days after his disappearance, on May 24th, a team consisting of 14 Sherpas was able to locate Ghosh's remains, buried beneath a snowdrift, as he had apparently frozen to death during his descent. However, tragically, one member of the search and rescue team, a man named Nima Charing Sherpa, became separated from the group as another storm battered Makalu, and similar to Ghosh, he ultimately would freeze to death, exposed to the harsh elements that whipped against Makalu's upper slopes. In the aftermath of the incident, the Indian mountaineering community was rocked by the news of Ghosh's death, as he was fondly remembered as a selfless, friendly climber who was willing to risk his own life to help others, an extremely selfless act within mountaineering, as he had demonstrated on a climb on Dhaulagiri, where he successfully assisted a badly stricken Indo-Tibetan police expedition team member to safety after a grueling night spent on the mountain, ultimately saving the man's life. Dipankar Ghosh was a highly respected and accomplished mountaineer with 25 years of experience. However, perhaps again a glimpse into his past climbs can glean light as to what happened that fateful day, as, going back to his previous climbs, he had completed several late afternoon summits of other 8,000 meter peaks, despite being expressly warned against doing so. Despite the warnings, he had managed to weather the hardships of doing this before, and unfortunately, perhaps a bit stricken by summit fever himself that day, he decided to continue his bid for Makalu's summit, despite the rapidly changing weather conditions, a decision that unfortunately that day would carry fatal consequences. Thank you all for watching.